Thank you, Phil. Is that its debut?
Yeah, pretty much.
All
yeah,
right.
Pretty much,
All
yeah.
right. Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
A real pleasure.
So I'm going to do a couple little announcements. We have a little activist table right here, and we just started our second petition to free the Holy Land Foundation 5, and there's a description of who they are. If you don't know, come and I'll tell you the whole thing. If you really want to find out more, we have a copy, a bunch of copies of Miko Peled's book that's called Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5, and they are for sale here at the church. They are a group that grabbed us by the soul and have not let go. Nida Abu Bakr is the daughter of one of the Holy Land political prisoners, and his name is Shukri Abu Bakr. We have these beads. They're called mazbaha, which is Muslim prayer beads, and he makes them in his prison cell. He makes them out of bread. He makes the beads, and then he paints them very meticulously, and he gets them out to his daughter, who markets them. We have a bunch of them, and let me show you what one of them looks like. I'll put it in front of the camera too. Is it showing up good? Yeah. Okay. So before you go, if you're here physically, step up to the activist table and sign our petition to free the Holy Land Foundation 5. We already sent about 20 copies to many decision makers, all of our senators and all of the Massachusetts delegation and the president and the vice president. And here's the Miko Peled book, Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. We also have copies of Miko's other book, The General's Son, and some extra copies of a few other magnificent presenters that we've had here recently, like Reverend Barry Lynn, who was head of founding director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We have his 3-volume memoirs. We have a book written by Ann Seba, which is a biography of Ethel Rosenberg. And so look around. There's a million other books. Anything you see that you like, bring it to us and we'll say, yeah, you can either have that or you can have that in exchange for whatever kind of donation you want to make to community church. We also have our mailing list that's on the table as well. We'd be glad to keep in touch with you about our future programs. I want to tell you about a couple of things that are coming up. This Sunday, tomorrow night, Dylan Buston is our friend, songwriter, playwright, arts administrator, and storyteller extraordinaire, doing a concert of his own music. Saturday night, we have, not here, but in Chelsea, and we'll give you the address if you're interested, a peña, which is a Latin American style open mic. Soapbox sort of thing. You can sing, you can read a poem, you can make a proclamation, whatever you like. And there's a lot of food, and it's at our treasurer's house in Chelsea, Sandra Ruiz Harris. Sunday we have a concert in the morning. Matt Callahan giving us a concert and a film that he has made about slavery and abolition songs from the early 19th century. After that we have our annual meeting. We decide our new board, and we talk about our past, our present, and our future. If you're interested in becoming a member or learning more about us, please talk to me, and I'll tell you everything I know. Then there's June 18th, which is our Juneteenth celebration. Sunday, June 18th, Dr. Robert Bellinger will give us a a lecture on slavery and abolition and emancipation. June 19th, the actual Juneteenth, is when we have this reception for the crew of the Golden Rule. This is a sponsorship by Vets for Peace and Mass Peace Action and us. And then I'll tell you about, that's the end of our season. We go to sleep for a couple weeks, and then we come back in July and we host an address by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And that'll be at Roxbury Community College Auditorium. And we're looking forward to it because Community Church has never backed away from controversial voices that have been dissed or canceled or ignored by the mainstream media. And I would mention the likes of Henry Wallace, Gus Hall, Jill Stein, Norman Thomas, if you remember that far back, many others, Mel King, who lost the election but changed the face of Boston politics forever, of blessed memory. So that's July 12th. Am I right, Amar? Yeah. Wednesday, July 12th. So keep your antenna up for that and other events this summer. We have a couple of picnics. We have great stuff, and we rest a little bit too. We're so glad to welcome the Mondoweiss journalists to our stage. Or our pulpit, our auditorium, very humbly. I've kept up with Mondoweiss for a long time. In fact, I just grabbed for a shirt in my closet, and I'll show you my beautiful Mondoweiss t-shirt. We don't have any t-shirts tonight, but we have coffee mugs. Please don't hesitate to take a coffee mug home with you. I'm hoping they will leave a few with us here, and we will sell them for Mondoweiss and get the funds to where they belong, just as we do for olive oil brought to us from Jewish Voice for Peace, just as we do for all kinds of Palestinian products that are in the back that is brought to us from Olive Branch Fair Trade, that beautiful shop in Nantucket run by Linda Cohen. Just as we do for a lot of Central American crafts and embroidered shirts that yours truly brings from El Salvador and Guatemala. One last just thing I want to tell you that we've just been working on. Amar and I were up in the archives, and we found just a few things, and we're probably not following archival protocol, but we pulled a few things out of archives and made notes in the boxes that we took them out of, that we had taken them. We checked them out, sort of thing, and we made copies. And the copies of these are the originals that are kept in safekeeping, but the copies are in one of our window boxes. The other has all kinds of Sacco and Vanzetti and early Italian anarchist publications and paraphernalia. But I'll just go through these and tell you what we got here. We got a letter to Reverend Lothrop, our minister for 40 years, from John F. Kennedy. Then Senator John F. Kennedy, 1954. He's saying, thank you for your invitation to speak. Unfortunately, my Catholic faith doesn't allow me to speak on Sundays in any other than a Catholic church. But I will join you for a weeknight forum. We never got him for a weeknight forum, as far as I know. Senator John F. Kennedy. And this is the letter from Lothrop, the carbon copy. We have a Western Union telegram from Martin Luther King saying, unfortunately, a previous commitment makes it impossible for me to accept your invitation. Please know that I regret this very deeply. The Reverend M.L. King. We have a letter here from George F. Kennan, Department of State, early theoretician on and against empire and on and against the military-industrial complex. Again, sorry to have to tell you that I will be unable to accept your kind invitation. But he starts by praising Community Church up and down. But for whatever reason. Next we have Thurgood Marshall. who tells us on July 17, 1953, is this, I sincerely regret, yeah, oh well. He did end up speaking, and if you look on the table back there that has all our speakers' books, there's a blow-up of our community church newsletter when Thurgood Marshall spoke, and there's a letter from M.L. King saying, I'm sorry I can't come this year, but I really enjoyed attending community church many times while I was studying at Boston University. And then we have, let's see, Robert Oppenheimer. Much as I appreciate the invitation, you know where he's going from there, but it was an invitation to speak. And he's from the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey. Color and Democracy, Colonies and Peace, 1951. W.E.B. Du Bois, a letter from Du Bois. He talking about that he has just been acquitted, unexpectedly acquitted from some charges that he was facing. They took his passport and they charged him with sedition or espionage, or I forget what it was. The flimsy basis which they had, I cannot yet understand. Nevertheless, I'm very happy, of course, at the outcome. The audience which greeted me at your church was most inspiring. This must have been after he spoke. Last time he spoke was 1959, and we have a recording of it on our YouTube channel. And here's Ralph Bunche. This would be very interesting to find out more about him. He was very involved in the negotiations of creating State of Israel and what happened to Palestinians. He was a director of trusteeship at the United Nations and then became this U.S. representative to the United Nations, African-American Ralph Bunche. Here we have Supreme Court of the United States, William O. Douglas. I would like to speak at your church. I hope I can do so someday. The schedule for the new court term, which starts in early October, has not yet been made up. Thus, it is impossible for me to make any definite plans. But again, he praises community church up and down. Here's Justice Hugo Black. Okay, I'm sorry if I went on too long. This evening is about Mondoweiss, and it's about two journalists who are here with us, Phil Weiss and Michael Arria. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks for that great introduction. I guess my email will be in there someday. Gratefully accepting the invitation.
It doesn't belong in that envelope.
Okay. So we're going to talk about how the American love affair with Israel is coming to an end. I came up with a title. I'm a much more, I'm a wishful thinker, and can't help myself. Michael will be a little bit more realistic, I hope, during this discussion. So I'm going to begin. Then I'm going to hand it off to Michael, and then we're going to kick it back and forth a little bit, and then hope to have an informal discussion with some of y'all too. So I was born in Boston, so when I come back here, it's always there's a sense of, at some deep part of me, of coming home. So I'm really grateful for the invitation and grateful to be here. And I also reflect that, speaking personally about why one of my things I'm most ashamed about in my work as a journalist is that I'm 67 and I only got to this issue of Israel and Palestine 15 years ago, after the Iraq War. So I was 50 years old when I first went to Israel and Palestine. And as an American Jew, that's a little bit unusual, but first of all, that want nothing to do with the issue, and secondly, to sort of blind myself to the reality over there. That was my stance until I was 50 years old. And I I feel some shame about that, and yet it speaks to the very powerful omerta that exists inside the Jewish community against being a dissident on this question. And I went to college at Harvard across the river, and I always remember when I'm here that when I was 17 or 18 years old, I was at the college news. I was very active in the college paper, and excuse me, I remember saying to a friend who worked at the newspaper that, well, isn't Israel expansionist? This was in 1977 or, I'm sorry, 1975. I said, isn't Israel expansionist? It seems like it's kind of expansionist. And this fellow said to me, his name was Eric Grindell, and he was a leading neoconservative subsequently. The Harvard Crimson newspaper, as you surely know, is this kind of rehearsal space for people who want to go into the elite in journalism. And Eric became a very famous editor in New York. And here we were, teenagers, and he said to me, you really should not be commenting on Israel like that if you do not know what the Balfour Declaration is or what Transjordan is, and other kind of statements. And I just remember being floored at the time as a teenager that I was getting a literacy test before I could speak out about Israel. And the shame is that I accepted that literacy test. I realized I didn't know what the Balfour Declaration was. I didn't know what Transjordan was. I was not a very good student of history, but I didn't, I didn't know a lot about Vietnam, and I was against the Vietnam War. And I didn't know a lot about conditions in the South, and I was against Jim Crow. And yet, so on these other issues that my mother had always trained me to be so forceful and outspoken about, the outspokenness went dead quiet when it came to Israel. And and part of the effectiveness of that ban that I accepted was part of the Jewish community. It was because I was part of the Jewish community. It was because Eric's father had escaped the Holocaust. He knows this. I don't know. Who am I to say? Who am I to be critical of Israel? And I was thinking about just the degree of inhibition that I felt about this that was absolutely inexcusable, but that the Holocaust was this heavy weight that came to bear on me. And I remember being in Israel and I finally got rid of that after many years, after the Iraq War, and I finally said, it was when my brother said before the Iraq War, he said, what's your position on the Iraq War? And I said, are you kidding? I'm demonstrating against it. And my brother said, well, we demonstrated against the Vietnam War, but my Jewish newspaper says this war could be good for Israel. So that was, fast forward from 1975 to 2002, it was a great shock to me to hear my brother, who I regarded as a good liberal, saying that he might support this war that we all knew was going to be a disaster. No one, you didn't have to be a political scientist to know that that was going to, I mean, we didn't have any idea of how much destruction it would bring to the Arab world and to Iraq and neighboring societies. And yet, we knew that that was a terrible idea. And the idea that, again, my community was being quieted, was keeping its mouth shut because this would be good, that was a great shock to me. And by that time, I was in my 40s, and I realized I had no excuse but to look at Israel. And I realize I'm rambling a little, but it's this is why I'm engaged in the question. And I reflect that when I was in Palestine for the first time, or one of the many trips I took actually, I remember picking up a hitchhiker, an Israeli hitchhiker on the West Bank. And because you pick up hitchhikers and this guy, and this is one way I got to interview these Israelis. So I picked this guy up, and we were driving along, and I said, and he lived in a settlement, and I was saying, let's say that I could wave a magic wand and there would be no more Zionism. Actually, I said wave a magic wand and no one would have to die here. No one else would die. You're in this the IDF. He had told me that he was a reservist in the army. He said, you worry about dying. You have friends who are going to die. These Palestinians are. Let's say I waved a magic wand and no one would have to die, but it wouldn't be a Jewish state. It would be a democracy. Wouldn't you just wave that magic wand? And this young man got very upset with me and drew himself up, and he said, but no, we can't do that. And I said, well, why not? I mean, you don't want people to have to die. And he said, but the Jews need this. We need this because we were unsafe because of the Holocaust. So this same sort of historical spiritual burden that Eric Brindell had brought down on me in 1975 to shut the fuck up, this young man was saying, no, we can't have democracy because Jews will be unsafe. And I would just end these remarks by noting what I think many of you know, that this last week, a 2-year-old boy named Mohammed al-Tamimi was shot by Israeli forces in the head outside Nabi Saleh. Many of you have been to Nabi Saleh on the West Bank. It's a tiny village that has shown a courage that none of us I can't imagine any of us showing against occupying forces. There's a settlement right near there called Halamish that has taken the spring of Nabi Saleh, and these people have risen up and said, no, this is our land. And they've paid an incredible price, and this week they paid an unimaginable price of this beautiful 2-year-old boy being shot in the head and dying. And the thing that is so shocking to me about this, as much as the horror of seeing these pictures of this beautiful little boy, is the American response, the American Jewish Zionist response. J Street issued a statement of a tweet said, oh, this is so horrible that this boy should die. On our website this week, Mariam Barghouti says this is what ethno-nationalism is about. And I think she's right and J Street is wrong. I think this is actually what ethno-nationalism does. It requires the killing of non-Jews, Palestinians, and it's going to happen again. And it's inexcusable, and as a Jew, I find it horrifying that anyone in our country where we enjoy so many rights would be standing up for ethno-nationalism. So I have not answered the question of why the love affair with the state of Israel, America's love affair with Israel is going to wither and die. We'll get to that. Michael will get to that. But I had to begin in that personal space, and thank you.
Thanks, Phil. I was also born in Boston. It's my first time here. Thanks for having me. Shout out to Waltham Hospital. I appreciate the specific topic. I did a webinar last week, and the first question was, why does the U.S. support Israel? So that was pretty daunting. This feels semi-manageable. I wanted to maybe start by mentioning that the majority of our staff at this point at Mondoweiss is Palestinian, based in Palestine. I just think it's important to point out, because anything we talk about in terms of shifts or lawmakers changing or the American public, all of this is obviously coming. Politicians and people don't wake up one day and suddenly think Palestinians are good. It comes from lots of hard work, and those original calls come from Palestine. I mean, BDS itself, obviously a call from Palestine civil society almost 20 years ago, which has been continued and heeded by activists from across the spectrum. And I think, connected to that, we were talking before this at the table about kind of increasing amount of House members who my job is U.S. correspondent, so I cover a lot of what lawmakers say, policy, watch State Department briefings. And that's part of it, of course. There's a growing number. I think like on Betty McCollum's bill, it's usually between 22, 27 House members who kind of highlight our issue or stand up for Palestine. Obviously, that wasn't always the case. We talked about the example of someone like Ayanna Pressley here, who, I think we were saying 2 or 3 years ago, she was, like at first it seemed like of the squad, she was kind of like the establishment liberal member. She backed Warren while everybody else in the squad backed Sanders. She was a Hillary surrogate. And when they had that big vote a few years ago on the BDS movement to condemn it, she was the only member to vote in favor of that, the only member of the squad to vote in favor of that. She said she did it to honor her Jewish constituents. She faced backlash from, people, including her Jewish constituents locally. And I think, since then, she's been on all the bills that we cover. She signed all the letters that we cover. And, when the Iron Dome vote came up, she was one of the only Democrats to vote against it. And AOC, of course, voted present. So there were squad members who didn't vote for it. And the people who voted for that bill, including people we cover and on this issue, who are good usually, like Betty McCollum. On the flip side, obviously, glass half empty, the Senate is a different story. Katie Porter, who I think people would say is probably to the left of the Biden administration, pretty progressive. There's a piece in the Jewish Insider a few months ago. I think that, they have like the exact opposite editorial line than us, but they do good reporting. And, she's running for Senate. She's running for the Dianne Feinstein seat. And she was talking about what she was doing to prepare for her, I think, first trip to Israel. And she had met with her first thing was that she read Noah Tishby's book, who, is a Israeli actress who very prominent anti-BDS person. And she met with local AIPAC officials in California. And when she got there, she met with Netanyahu. This is a J Street trip. J Street wasn't allowed in the room, but she got in the room with the other Congress members. I looked it up, and when there was a J Street trip during the first Netanyahu time he was in power, and nobody was allowed in the room. So I don't know the progress of it. They're actually getting in the room now. I don't know, but she said she was impressed by his willingness to listen to her and what she was trying to say, and so that's like the glass half empty. That's still pretty much the mainstream of the Democratic Party, even somebody who's to the left of the Biden administration. But having said that, when Bernie ran for president, the mainstream media consistently saw this frame that his positions were out of step with the mainstream of the Democratic Party, which actually wasn't true. It was out of step with the leaders of the Democratic Party, but poll after poll showed that Democratic voters, the base, actually support his domestic agenda, whether it's Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. And it's kind of the same thing with this. I think, when Rashida Tlaib is covered by the mainstream press, her foreign policy positions are covered as if she's out of step with the mainstream if she's out of step with the Democratic Party. That's not actually true. She's out of step with the majority of Democratic lawmakers. But I think, me and Phil have both covered over the last 3 years, just an overwhelming amount of polling on this issue. Gallup poll from 6 months ago or something saying for the first time since they've been tracking Middle East opinions of, Americans, a majority of Democratic voters say they sympathize more with Palestinians than Israelis. For the first time ever, a majority of Democratic voters say that they believe that the U.S. should apply pressure to Israel, not to Palestine, when it comes to the conflict. Vast majority of Democratic voters, every time they've done polls in the last 3 years, Center for American Progress, Data for Progress, vast majority say they support conditioning aid for Israel, essentially agreeing with the Betty McCollum bill and the position, despite the fact that the lawmakers they elect do not reflect that reality. And some of that, I think, the cynical interpretation was some of that was just the byproduct of Netanyahu. You heard a lot about Netanyahu's Israel, and the idea was, the poll out the other day from Pew that said only one out of every 10, liberal Democrats is a fan of Netanyahu. But I think we've seen poll after poll that indicate that it goes beyond Netanyahu. There was a poll the other day done by the University of Maryland, their critical issues poll, and they found that, 43%? 44% of Democratic voters say that Israel is an apartheid state. Those numbers, what's staggering about that, they also asked people what they thought of the BDS movement. Over half the people they talked to said they'd never heard of it, but of the 50% who had heard of it, I think it was 41% said that they supported it. And that is such an incredible number when you think of how vilified that movement has been within the mainstream media and within mainstream politics from both sides of the aisle. So I think there's reasons for hope when it comes to numbers like that. We see that something is shifting, something is changing, and I think maybe we could talk a little more later about why that might be happening. But for us, I think, we have these kind of like flashpoint moments over the last few years, I think. Like the Ben and Jerry's situation was a good example. And it goes to what I was saying at the beginning. That's a fight that, in Vermont, they had been waging for over a decade, the activists there, pushing and pushing and pushing. They finally budged, and look at the reaction and the total, no pun intended, meltdown from Israeli politicians and American politicians. You had attorney generals, divesting from the parent company. Ben & Jerry's stood up. They ended up suing the parent company. There's arguments whether or not, they sold it to his Israeli merchandiser, whether or not what he's going to sell is technically Ben & Jerry's ice cream. But I think, my position would just be, when it comes to that, the actual specifics, I'm not sure they matter as much as the fact that, that number, only 50% had heard of BDS. Every time something like that happens, more and more people hear about the BDS movement. Here locally, Ken Roth, when he was supposed to get that fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government, rescinded at the last moment. Dean admitted to somebody involved in the process that it was because he had tweets criticizing Israel, and they have big, pro-Israel donors there. Same situation. He was the former head of the Human Rights Watch, very mainstream organization. We have very mainstream organizations like HRW, Amnesty International, using the word apartheid. I mean, that's not like food, not bombs. These are, organizations with big money donors. And every time that story gets out, more and more people hear the word apartheid associated with Israel. So I just think, we're going to talk about it some more, but going forward, it does seem, in my opinion, that things are shifting, at least when it comes to the opinions of Democratic voters and progressives in this country. The space is opening up a little bit. And the last thing I would just say connected to that is, a lot of my job at Mondoweiss is tracking the pro-Israel groups. And I think their reaction to this stuff is also very interesting. When BDS started in the early 2000s, the line on it was that it was like a laughable movement that was never going to amount to anything. Dozens and dozens of articles about how it's never had any impact. Every time a big musical act like Madonna said she was going to play in Tel Aviv, there was a campaign to stop her. If it didn't stop her, there were always like hashtag BDS fail from pro-Israel groups. But the question is, if it's a movement that doesn't matter and is having no impact, then why is there an anti-BDS law in virtually every state? Why does the ADL spend so much time and money trying to stop it? Why do these groups with lots of money, AJC, AIPAC, spend all this time talking about BDS? The Israeli government funded an app that was literally designed to create a troll army for people to comment on, like Madonna did play Tel Aviv. You could earn little prizes and, whatever, if you commented, support for an artist that played in Israel and added like a little Israeli flag. People were collecting points. This was funded by the Israeli government. They've since stopped the program and, pulled back the app because it was having no impact. So the reality is like that app failed, not BDS. And there's just so many examples of that kind of thing. Like when we look at, like AIPAC, we talk about this a lot at the site, but, I think they spent $27 million on the last round of Democratic primaries. And, after Citizens United, obviously they were very upfront about the fact that they spend it and they can do it. There's nothing illegal about what they're doing. But when they spent that money in the Democratic primaries, they created a super PAC. They created two super PACs. One of them was called AIPAC PAC. That's the PAC they use for the Republican primaries because they can admit that they're AIPAC. The one they use for the Democratic primaries is called United Democracy Project, which is like a innocuous sounding liberal name, so they can use it so people don't know it's connected to Israel. Their ads don't mention Israel. In fact, many of their ads criticize Democrats for not being loyal enough to Biden, which is hilarious because they have also spent millions of dollars on Republicans who refuse to certify Biden's election. This is the same thing with Democratic Majority for Israel, another group that we cover a lot, which was created and it is run by a pollster for a former Israeli prime minister, started a lobbying group in the United States. They have a woman on their board who has called for Gaza to be burned to the ground. They were created allegedly as a liberal alternative to AIPAC. So this is a liberal alternative. They're a former pollster for a former prime minister, and a woman who says she wants genocide conducted against Gaza. This group spent heavily when Bernie ran for president because they didn't like him because he wanted to condition aid, among other things. They ran a bunch of ads in swing states. They never mentioned Israel once. They never mentioned Israel in these ads because they know it's not a winning issue with Democrats. They won't say it because the polling indicates that their brand is declining and less people feel committed to Israel in that way. I think we ran last year, there was that poll that said 25% of Jewish people now believe it's an apartheid state. Younger Jewish people don't have an existential connection to the country. So, as Phil said, I think there's reasons to be optimistic. I think things are changing slowly. And yeah, I think we can talk about it more. But
Yeah, I would just fill in some of to add to what Michael's saying. To be a little more specific on that, the Gallup poll said this spring that 49% of Democrats are more sympathetic to Palestine than Israel, and 38 are more sympathetic to Israel than Palestine. So overwhelmingly, by 49 to 38, Democrats are more sympathetic to Palestine than they are to Israel. What's significant about that number, 49 to 38, which has become a mantra of mine since Gallup put this out, is if you go back to 2016, it was 53 to 23 Israel. So you have seen a total flip in that number, not total flip, but from 53 to 23, it's gone to 49 to 38. So that is certainly a dramatic and I'd say radical shift inside the Democratic Party. And what is evident to me is, before I give credit to us in this room, everyone in this room who has been working on this issue, and Jill earlier mentioned the importance of George Floyd and intersectionality to which happened, George Floyd was killed 3 years ago, and that has obviously played a role in this issue. But before I get to, the whys of it, I would just, and the credit we deserve for that, I would say that this is a march that is happening. We are part of a movement. I've always, studied movements in college and, always heard the word movement. Now I'm part of a movement and I understand what a movement is. Movement really is, you're moving the people. And I think that the people have moved because if you think about it, it used to be that they were fighting this war on college campuses for Israel. That was where the battle lines were. The pro-Israel forces were really engaged. What's going to happen to our kids? They've lost the college campuses. The Harvard Crimson, where I once worked, endorsed BDS last year. It was shocking to the pro-Israel movement. But here you have a very elite newspaper that endorses BDS. So they have lost the sort of, and they will say, you will hear the pro-Israel community saying that campuses are a hostile place to be for Israel these days. And where the battle line now is clearly at the progressive edge of the official Democratic Party. They see these numbers. This is the Democratic Street. The Democratic Street is clear, 49 to 38. That's all ages of Democrats. And when you get to young, it's 3 to 1. But that's where the Democratic Street is. They all know that. There was someone we quoted on our site a few weeks ago saying there are people in the White House the people in the White House know it's apartheid. They can't say so. So this battle against calling it apartheid, against BDS, is now taking place inside the Congress, at the left edge of the Congress. And that is a great victory for us, that we have sort of pushed the walls back on where the battleground is. The battleground is, we're getting to Berlin. We're getting closer and closer. And when they buy somebody now, they bought, Jamal Bowman said, the congressman from New York, who's part of the squad, very inspiring congressman. He said who beat Eliot Engel to get, didn't he beat Eliot? Yeah, beat Eliot Engel to get into stalwart of the Israel lobby. Bowman said moderated his position on Israel somewhat, just as Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, did. And just as Ayanna Pressley has on occasion moderated. But the great thing to observe is that these politicians who are in the squad and progressive Democratic politicians, often with bases that include a lot of people of color, these Congress people, they may be bought for an election cycle, but they don't stay bought. And so Summer Lee was elected from Pittsburgh last year, and she said she sort of was offered a modulated line on Israel, but she is now voting she's a co-sponsor of the Betty McCollum bill, and she's a stalwart. She is going to be standing up on this issue. So I'm just really encouraged by that process.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would also say, the stuff people focus on too, we were just talking about, I remember when Trump criticized socialism in one of his State of the Union addresses, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because I remember the Bush administration, the idea that he would have to criticize socialism publicly was it was a joke. There was just no socialism brewing. And it's the same thing. I mean, we cover a lot of the stuff that the ADL does lately, Jonathan Greenblatt, and it's like, it's virtually all they talk about now is anti-Zionism. He gave a speech the other day at his annual gala, did not mention right-wing anti-Semitism once, did not mention Trump once. Almost the entire speech was devoted to left-wing, to the left, and anti-Zionist. This is their target. This is the thing. This is ostensibly a civil rights group. That's how they position themselves. That's how they, structure themselves or present themselves to the public. And they're interviewed consistently by the mainstream media, who barely ever pushes back. If you look at that report they recently put out about this uptick in anti-Semitic incidents, which they claim is like a 500% rise in 10 years, or some crazy number. If you actually look at the methodology of that report, they use a lot of examples of anti-Zionist protests as alleged acts of anti-Semitism. And if Jonathan Greenblatt's on Face the Nation, they're just citing this poll like openly. Stuff like that was cited in Biden's recent, anti-Semitism policy. No questions asked, but from the mainstream media. But I mean, the fact that they are focusing on this so much, I think, shows that our position is a threat. Like, they take it seriously. They're devoting all these resources to it.
Yeah, and I would add that one of the things that Greenblatt focuses on is Jewish anti-Zionists. Greenblatt will say there are even Jews who are being anti-Semitic and, quote unquote, by being anti-Zionist. And I think that that's one of the great things about another sign of the movement and the progress in this movement is that the Jewish community has shifted in significant ways. And Michael mentioned that poll of the Jewish Electoral Institute from a couple of years ago where I think 40% of younger Jews think it's apartheid. And these are Jews for whom the Holocaust fears are not as pronounced. Obviously, fear of the Holocaust, the trauma and intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust was, for many Jews, including my mother, I know very personally, this was a justification of anything Israel did. And Eric Brindell, this guy, was anything we do, what happened was visited on us, anything goes to. And I think it was Norman Mailer who said Hitler's greatest triumph was that he reduced the American Jewish community to one question: is it good for the Jews? And which is, a terrible legacy, and certainly just was used to justify anything Israel did. And that happily is fading. That grip is fading from the Jewish community. I think the Jewish community plays an important gatekeeper role on some of these shifts in attitude that we've discussed. And maybe we'll have a more open discussion about this in a moment, but that is a key part of this shift that we're seeing, is that even Jews are giving permission to have this Israel critical discussion. When Kamala Harris gave a speech a few days ago about anti-Semitism, she did not mention Israel once. And so she knows what's going on at the Democratic street. When Chris Van Hollen says, I want to, the senator from Maryland, when he says, I got to see, where is, I'm at the end of my rope, I need to see this investigation of Shireen Abu Akleh's murder. Shireen Abu Akleh was this Palestinian journalist. She's pictured at the community church. She was killed on May 11th of last year by Israeli sniper, and they lied about it for months, and then they finally admitted it. And she was a Palestinian American. Even the FBI said it would investigate, and Chris Van Hollen, whose district I think includes some relatives of Shireen Abu Akleh, has been very forceful on this. And Chris Van Hollen is being forceful on this, I think, because he knows that his district, a lot of Jews in it, even there's a lot of criticism of Israel, and he is licensed in a way he has not been in the past.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can open it up, but the last thing I was going to mention that I just thought of as you were speaking is, this Biden anti-Semitism policy, which came out, I guess, a couple weeks ago now. Pro-Israel groups, since he's been elected, have been pushing the administration to adopt this IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. And they didn't. I mean, there was an article in Newsweek in the winter from Ken Marcus, who's at it. He had this whole thing about imagine waking up for Christmas and there's no presents, because he thought he expected Biden, when he ran for president, had publicly endorsed it, and everybody thought that he was essentially going to extend Trump's terrible executive order, which opened the floodgates for all these lawsuits, and civil rights complaints. The Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Education, they put out that fact sheet. They didn't endorse it. They've been pushing it. It's a loss for, in my opinion, the pro-Israel, who have tons of resources and have been dumping it into this issue. But some reporting in Jewish Insider said, Biden is suddenly being pulled in two directions, because now all of a sudden he has progressive groups saying don't adopt that IHRA. So they make reference to it, but he didn't adopt it formally. Now he's kicked the can down the road and says he's not even going to revisit it until December of this year. So, sometimes something's a win and it's not like a big celebration. It's not easily detectable, but that to my mind is a win. It's proof that there's enough pressure where something is happening and something's changing. They adopted IHRA working definition at a county in Maryland. And I remember speaking to one of the activists for a story we did, and she said, we lost the fight, but I felt we built a coalition. We have a group of people who came together in our community who are going to keep coming to these things, who are going to keep on fighting BDS laws, stuff like, reworking the definition of anti-Semitism, anti-Palestine stuff, and that's part of it. If anybody saw that movie Boycott, which was very good, which followed the 3 stories of people challenging their state's BDS laws. At one point they interview a Democratic lawmaker in Arkansas who says he voted for it. Admits to the camera he doesn't really know what was in it when he voted for it. He just knew it was about stopping anti-Semitism, but since he voted for it, he's heard from all his constituents saying, why did you vote for this? And now he admits, if I could do it again, I wouldn't vote for it. So as Phil was saying, it's a movement. It keeps, as it grows broader and there's more awareness of, these kind of issues, I think politicians will eventually kind of see which way the wind is blowing, so to speak.
Great. So I thought, I don't know if Dean has a program on this, but I thought we'd open it up for discussion and comment. There's a lot of smart, engaged people in this room and who have opinions and insights. So I thought we should shut up and do a little listening and have some discussion of some of these questions.
I saw a hand
Dorothy?
right here.
Dorothy had her hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. You've said a lot about the Jewish community. What about the evangelicals?
What about
My feeling, I have to say that I don't care about the evangelicals, because I think that the evangelicals do not have much power inside the Democratic Party. It may be that they have an important that they are putting a lot of pressure on this issue. It may be. What I do know is, like charity begins at home, so does scrutiny, and I know my community, the Jewish American community, has played a reactionary role on this question. So for me, I'm speaking personally, I think that before I start blaming the evangelicals for this, who have my mother has been an active Democrat for a long time, and she is not very good on this question, and she is hardly singular. And there are a lot of Jewish Americans who have played a very negative role inside the Democratic Party. So I sort of started home on this one, because I'm from that community.
I was just going to mention, I pulled it up on my phone, but a couple years ago there was actually a poll out of North Carolina, Pembroke, which indicated that among young evangelicals, this issue is shifting the same way it's shifting for young people across, the spectrums of many faiths, whether it's Jewish or otherwise. So, in that poll, this is 2021, only 33% of young evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 29 said that they support Israel. 24% said they support Palestine, and 42% said they didn't have an opinion. They ran the same exact questions in 2018, so just a few years before. And when they did it that time, 69% of young evangelicals said they supported Israel, and just 5.6% said they supported Palestine. So even within the context of evangelicals, when we look at the age gap, it points to what we were talking about in terms of this, Israel not being a brand, so to speak, that resonates with young people or that they have an existential connection to, regardless of their faith.
Michael's a lot more logical than I am. Barbara.
Barbara, I'm coming to you.
Thank you. You seem hopeful about movement in the Democratic Party because of the change of the population, yet Betty McCollum has introduced her fourth bill. There are either 22 or 23 supporters. One of the earlier bills had either 32. The Democrats know damn well what's going on. They know the facts, and yet nobody is signing on to the bill. And in the administration as a whole, I mean, the speech that Blinken gave the other day was totally nauseating. I think it was you folks who covered it, and it's enough to make you want to vomit when you read the article. So how could you be hopeful when the people in power, even though they know the truth, don't give a damn?
Well, I'm less hopeful than you, I think. I mean, I think that this issue is just, there's all kinds of things, like I was saying earlier, where the base of the Democratic Party is to the left of, their lawmakers when it comes to issues. And then the issue becomes, of course, like, how do you push them, or how do you change them on this issue? But I think Phil's more you can answer this one because you're more hopeful, so you might have.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I guess I would say that, Biden is running for re-election now. He's in re-election mode. It's not, and that's the last bastion. The White House, the Congress, that is the last bastion. That's where, so I think that, Barbara, you would probably agree with me that, well, I guess you point out that the McCollum bill is getting fewer signatories this time than last time.
No, it's early. It was just filed
I see.
a short
Okay.
time ago, but still,
Yes.
the last version.
But they lost Newman and some other people who supported it.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to think about that one. Because I guess I see the attitude shifts you would agree that the attitude shifts are profound, right? But there's a lack of connection with the power structure.
And even with the lobbying, and in our area, we've been lobbying Catherine Clark for a long time, and she signed one of the original bills, and now you get all this BS from her that if it ever comes to a vote, I'll think about it.
Now, but Catherine, she is now part of the Democratic leadership, right? Okay. Okay, so that's a critical shift that she has made personally.
Well, she shifted her position on this while she was climbing.
I see, okay.
And even though we've commented that with her being in a position of power, she would have influence that could help move other Democratic congresspeople along with her, but she wants no part of it.
Right. Well, the thing is that, obviously, for years, people in this room, grassroots people, grassroots organizers, they have despaired about Congress on a lot of issues, right? That we do our work in the communities, and I guess this issue as well as I do, so far be it from me to try to explain things that you know as well, and you're engaged on them. But my response would be that we're continuing to mobilize our communities, and those communities are changing, and we're trying to move the ground under their feet, and it's Democratic majority for Israel, that you have a whole lobbying organization that split off from AIPAC, just to stop our progress inside the Democratic Party. So there's a war on, and they're going to be on the wrong side of that war as long as they can until they fall. And I guess my movie of this is, just really, has a great last scene in it. And yours, I'm not sure, it's more realistic possibly, but.
That was itching my head, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So last summer, I was fortunate enough to intern on Capitol Hill so I was part of a program basically that brings 5 Palestinians and 5 Israelis on Capitol Hill to push for, I guess, a more just foreign policy. And most of the Israelis who come on the program are more liberal, quote unquote. But I have to say that as a Palestinian, I found myself so isolated. I mean, walking in Congress, you see flags of Israel. I stand with Israel. We talked with many representatives, and we talked with Catherine Clark, and you always have to bring this issue of, for Israel's security, we would like for you to stop funding settlements. All right? We always have to bring that buzzword. And I guess my question is more, how do you navigate working within the Democratic Party? Because it's such a cult, and you realize once you're in the establishment, you realize that they are both bought and sold by the same big head. There's just no difference. I mean, talking to a Democratic because we would have to prepare before talking to a representative, right? Like talking to a Republican is different than a Democrat. But for me as a Palestinian, I was like, it's really not that difficult. To a Democrat, I bring in, it's like you pretend to be like part of the J Street, and you're like, for Israel's security, we just need the West Bank, like Gaza, human consumption, whatever. And with a Republican, you're just like, you bring in the Iron Dome, and you're like, well, there are many open air areas, as they call it, where Palestinian citizens of Israel are living, that they are not protected. And so I guess you have to be very selective with the issues because they won't listen to you otherwise. Sorry, I rambled, but...
May I ask you, did you have any good experiences meeting Congress people? We've several times referred to the squad, which is small, but it does include some politicians who are outspoken in favor of... Did you have any of those encounters that made you feel good?
Oh, for
and
sure.
Can you tell us about that?
Chris Van Hollen was very much interested in the Palestinian issue, and he was working on the issue of Shireen Abu Akleh at the time. I think I don't want to say the only reason, but there are a few lobbyists that I've met who are very much on the Shireen Abu Akleh matter. I question, though, I think they're able to even work on it because she's Palestinian American, and that plays a role in it. Jamie Raskin is honestly great when it comes to this issue. He tries his best. As a Palestinian, he was more welcoming than other representatives. He's more on the liberal side, mid.
Interesting.
But his office is very much willing to help. Rashida Tlaib, of course. These are the offices that I found to be more responsive. I mean, I emailed the offices after I met with them because I'm on the job hunt, and I was emailing them, and they were the ones who actually helped me most.
Wow.
So
there were some good moments.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Well, I think connected to that, though, I was going to say, whether people work, I'm not sure how it works within the Democratic Party, but in terms of things happening outside of it, in terms of activism and things shifting, I mean, something, you've mentioned them a few times. I think you just mentioned them, but we follow J Street as closely as we follow AIPAC, and they, like this liberal Zionist, I don't know, you can talk about it probably more eloquently than me, but it can't sustain itself. It's so ridiculous. This is a pro-Israel organization, and every time something happens, it's so tepid. They have to hit both sides on this issue, and it's breaking. It's hit a point where there's stuff about the two-state solution in the face of this brutality that we're seeing. It just can't sustain itself the way that these other groups that we're talking about can. I don't know if you have any more I guess I would just to that, just the idea of the pressure kind of breaking that consensus and eventually getting to a point where people are going to have to. The topic of a one-state solution is going to have to.
Absolutely. But I'd also say that the young lady, you're talking about working in Congress and in the Democratic Party, and we ourselves don't do that because for the very reasons that it really is banging your head against the wall. And Jill mentioned earlier her encounters with Jake Auchincloss and going to him on a couple of occasions. you know, Jill has a strong stomach. I couldn't do that. I mean, you've got to have a will of iron to go in there. And I'd rather, you know, it's.
I'm on the street also.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a work, that Jake.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard work. And I take my hat off to people who are able to batter against that because they're having an effect. But, yeah.
I want to call on Susan Nye, who was telling me on the phone yesterday about a new initiative which really resounded to me, and it's basically among churches, I think, where it started, but it's basically, we're against apartheid. Don't say anything more. You know, that sounds like a really powerful message. And Susan, maybe you can tell us a little bit more.
I don't know how much I can tell you. It's a brand new initiative started by American Friends Service Committee, and it just had a kickoff the other night. I think Steve Lowe may be able to say quite a bit about this as well. It's apartheid-free communities. It's not just churches. It can be any community that can declare itself that it's apartheid-free, and then there are steps that one can take and, you know, take a stand on this. I don't know that much more, but Steve has a handout. It's brand new. I think it has a lot of potential. The people on the kickoff program the other night were very impressive. I believe it's been recorded and we can start using it. So I don't know. Do you want to ask me a question that I might be able to answer? I mean, I think I'm with Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East, and they've been helping with the planning for this launch for quite a while. And there are a few communities already signed on. They didn't want to launch it until they had some. And I mentioned it to Dean because I thought perhaps Community Church of Boston might like to be the first church in the area to do it. But it does not have to be a church.
Well, Susan, I would just say, you know, that I think everyone in this room is aware that the word apartheid is a very important word in describing this situation. And the advance of that word into the mainstream is happening every month. Every year there's more people adopting that word. And so that's a great, to my way of thinking, that's a vital, that's one way. And people in Congress have said it's anti-Semitic. It's a blatant lie to say this is apartheid. So this is a red line. And it's obviously an important focus of our organizing. So I was really heartened to learn that the AFSC was doing this.
Yeah, it's brand new, but does have a lot of potential.
Yeah.
We need this on a sandwich board on the street in front of 10,000 people that walk by every day.
I mean, if you consider that Jimmy Carter was basically thrown out of the Democratic Party in 2006 for putting that word apartheid in his book title. And now you have people inside the Beltway using that word, you know, at the Brookings Institution, and Rashida Tlaib using that word, and Betty McCollum using that word. I mean, and Human Rights Watch and all and it's apartheid. It was apartheid in 2006, and it's even more apartheid now. And so you got to name it what it is.
Definitely.
And using apartheid rather than conflict
Yes.
is really important, because when people talk about the conflict, it's like two people who are arguing, and it's not at all the case. But when
Right.
you talk about Israeli apartheid, that becomes clear to people that you're talking to.
Yeah, that's great, Barbara. I agree. It's a way to escape facing the facts.
Steve, do you have anything to add? I was very impressed with this launch the other night, and it was recorded. One of the speakers was a black pastor from Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
Very, very powerful. And he's been there.
Fantastic.
He can talk really, he can really preach it. And
Yeah.
he said, you know, it's worse than South Africa.
It's great. Yeah, it's great when people have been there. Steve, did you?
Well, it's taken the Gibraltar Foundation a long time to make the pivot that we made just in the past few weeks. When we formed the Gibraltar Foundation in 2016 to try to bring awareness to our community, the town of Lincoln and the area around it, to this issue, one of the things that we said loudly was that our purpose was to be an educational organization, to simply inform people about facts of what was going on in the region. And that it was not our interest to tell people how to think. We wanted to just allow people to learn enough so that they could reach their own conclusions. But in the past few weeks, in preparation actually for this event and the event that we'll be holding on Saturday afternoon, I gave a lot of thought to that and really have pivoted Gibraltar now. And we clearly are now stating that there is an apartheid in the region and that our purpose is, in fact, to dismantle it. And it's interesting because we reached those conclusions independent of the announcement that was made on June 6th. Two organizations got to the same point, but not in coordination with one another. The beauty of talking about apartheid as an issue is that it has nothing to do with nationality, it has nothing to do with nationalism, it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the name that we give to the territory in which this apartheid is being practiced. It's simply a principle that is a violation of international human rights law. It's a crime against humanity. It's something that, from a moral standpoint, no one should support and all should oppose. And I think the real beauty of apartheid is that it neutralizes a lot of the difficulties of talking about this issue, whether we call the place Palestine or whether we call it Israel or whether we want one state or two states. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with a social construct that exists within that region. So I think this movement that AFSC helped to organize is really an important one. I'm hopeful that it will gain traction, but they need help in that regard. The movement will obviously get attention initially, but I'm fearful that we've got to continue to put energy into it and try to promote it locally within our communities. The beauty of this also is that it will hopefully unite the Christian communities in America, which of course dominate the country, and it will hopefully finally bring the positions of these various Christian denominations, Protestant denominations, at the hierarchical level. They all understand this issue. They pass all kinds of resolutions for BDS and all kinds of issues. But talk to the people in the pews and they've never heard about it. They don't know anything about it. And one of the things that I'm very hopeful of is that if this does get traction, it will begin to push down into the pews some feelings about Israel and Palestine.
That's great. Thank you, Steve.
Amar.
Thanks, Dean. So, Dean mentioned, he mentioned earlier in the program about how, we're hosting Robert Kennedy Jr. on July 12th. And that's a person who's out of the mainstream already for his position on vaccines and for maybe lesser extent for his position on the Ukraine war. And recently, you guys probably saw a couple days ago that, you know, all his controversy with Roger Waters, he tweeted out a tweet in support of Roger Waters, who's in all this controversy about his performance. And then he deleted the tweet saying that I didn't know about Roger Waters' position on Israel. He basically threw Roger Waters under the bus. He threw Palestinian people under the bus. So, and also he, you know, in the past on his own podcast, he had on Max Blumenthal, who's like a pretty controversial person on this subject. So I'm wondering, like, what do you guys make of that? Like, why would he be, he's already out of the mainstream when it comes to like vaccines. That's a big issue. Everyone's calling him anti-vax. So why this issue would he, like, you know?
I don't know.
I mean, I found it, Amar, I was also struck by that here's a guy who's spending a lot of political capital on some very unpopular questions, and on the Israel question, he's hardline, seems to be hardline for Israel. I don't have an explanation. I mean,
His dad was
yeah, well, obviously that may have been a factor.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it speaks to the fact, I hasn't followed his campaign closely, but it might just speak to the fact that people are reflexively pro-Israel as they think that's the predominant maybe way to be and the way to gain votes.
He was in favor of Sirhan being paroled.
That's true,
The
yes.
only one in the family,
Yeah.
so.
Wow, interesting.
Rabbi Shumley said that his father was killed by Palestinian for his love of Israel, for his opposition to Israel.
I saw that, yeah.
Boteik said that?
He said that, but RFK Jr. himself is a skeptic. He's been saying Sirhan should be freed because he was the patsy like Lee Harvey Oswald. So, but Max Blumenthal is saying what you guys are saying. That,
Yes.
That the Democratic base is out of.
Yes.
They don't support Israel anymore. So does RFK Jr. not know that, or like even from a political calculation, he should have a more balanced position.
I'm surprised. Yeah, I thought that maybe, but I mean, certainly his father, I think, was very pro-Israel. If that, I mean, not that he's in lockstep with his late father, but
By the way, sorry to hold the mic. Just one last point on this. Have you guys seen the memo? Apparently, there's a memo from Donald Rumsfeld to RFK Sr. saying RFK wanted to make AIPAC register as a foreign agent. And
I have not seen that.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that was interesting.
In the 60s, in
Yeah,
the 1960s, yeah.
RFK wanted to make AIPAC register as a foreign agent. Donald Rumsfeld wrote him a letter saying, don't do that, this will hurt us with like constituents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that.
So
Then
wait,
RFK then died.
but Rumsfeld was advising a Democrat about
He was a
constitution.
congressman at that time in Michigan.
Oh, but was Rumsfeld wasn't a Democrat though.
No, but he was still a Congress. He wasn't a
Just
Democrat.
Right.
I don't
But
know if you wrote it to our-
Fulbright led that effort, didn't he, to try to get AIPAC to register as a foreign agent, and he got slammed down. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think that a lot of progressive or liberal Democrats would have been for having AIPAC register, and then they sort of quailed on that one. And
Yeah.
an early battle in the March of the Israel lobby.
So-
Oh,
There's no way.
well, but we want you to be heard
Yeah, but I.
online.
Okay.
It's an ice cream
Well,
cone.
what I'm gonna say isn't gonna go over very big anyway. I guess I'm probably more cynical than anybody here in that I don't give the human race any hope. I root for climate change. And one of the reasons is I see what our government system is. And to be honest, it's a joke. So you guys are talking about, well, the Democrats this way, and maybe we'll get some people to realize and people to learn a little about what's been going on in Israel. I happen to notice today in the Globe that it's the anniversary of the bombing of the Liberty. And it's been going on a long time here. And some people know, some people learn this, some people, but none of it really matters. And I guess my question now is, does it really matter at all what the United States feels about Israel? Israel is completely on its own at this point and doesn't care. The U.S. doesn't affect anything anymore. Nobody cares. Like,
$3.8 billion.
you know what? You know how much money they have? They don't care. We all think that matters. It may have mattered 50 years ago.
Military.
It doesn't matter now. And
It's a great question.
we don't seem to be, and I think we see it everywhere. Like Iran, when what's his name here, Trump was the president, they knew perfectly well there wasn't going to be a war. Trump was never going to have a war.
Right.
So they ignored us. Israel ignores us. Pretty much everybody ignores us now.
Well-
So it doesn't matter.
Right, it's a great question. I think it does matter enormously what the U.S. does. But before I get to that, I just want to remark that I think it's very pertinent to bring in the USS Liberty in the context of the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. Shireen Abu Akleh was an American who was killed last year, American journalist. Israel did with complete impunity. And of course, the USS Liberty, 34 American service people were killed, in 1967 with pretty much utter impunity. Rachel Corrie was killed in 2003. Other Americans have been killed and maimed by Israel, and with, again, complete impunity. Though I think that actually it would make a huge difference if America shifted, but that's.
Yeah, I think, billions of dollars. Yeah, I think it would impact it.
Where I think there's a difference, and this is sort of this is the second question I would have for you. Okay, here we go with this. Is the change that's happening, and again, this comes from somebody who thinks that our political system is a joke, and our people are jokes.
I'm not going to fall with you on that.
Is the change really that anybody's getting educated or seeing things, or Israel's doing something that they're noticing, or is it just that in general in this country, the younger generations coming up, especially because of the internet and TV and what they're seeing, is it just a difference where they don't have?
Great? That's great. I mean,
I agree with you.
I mean, yes, I think that's part of it. I mean, the Harvard Crimson endorsed BDS, and it's a very diverse staff. And when I was there, it was a Jewish club. Okay, so that sociologically has changed, and that's a wonderful thing. But I want to get back to your first question. We don't have a lot of time. I just want to say that my friend, the late Yossi Gervitz, an Israeli journalist, said the minute that the U.S. starts to cut off funds, he said in Tel Aviv to me, the minute the U.S. starts to cut off funds to Israel is the Saigon helicopter moment in this country. We all know what the Saigon helicopter moment was. When the U.S., did it matter to South Vietnam when the U.S., left Vietnam? Of course it did, and people were hanging on to those. And he was saying that that moment of imperial disfavor, when that finally happens, which it has not happened, we pour money, Blinken was bragging at that speech that we give almost $5 billion a year when you add it all up. These people have lived in the most entitled existence. When that shift will sometime happen, and you saw one of the things that made Netanyahu back down on this judicial reform was that companies, they were doing boycott. Zionists were doing boycott of Netanyahu. Firms were leaving the country. And so I think it would have a huge effect. But this is speculative, but I have a different opinion on that. So.
There are a couple of people on Zoom who want to join us.
Great.
Faye Strigler, welcome.
Okay, hi. Just something good. Representative Stephen Lynch just signed on to co-sponsor Betty's bill, and that just happened a few days ago. Thank you.
That's a tough nut to crack.
Right, and we cracked it. And the other thing is, I have a couple of things. One is about what you just said about whether the U.S. is important or not. I feel like the empire is crumbling here, and when we look at what happened to England, it was a series of struggles against their power in many countries that finally, did them in. And I think, and some of them I don't even know about. I don't even know about very much about the struggles in Africa against England. I still don't know about them. I know about Gandhi. I know something about Gandhi, but I don't know about a lot of the others. We don't even know about that stuff. So I just wanted to say that. And the other thing is, I have a question about, what motivates Democrats, because it seemed like when Rashida Tlaib took up the fight recently, what's his face got involved. I'm sorry, I can't remember anybody's name. The Republican guy.
Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy, yeah, he got involved in it, and I'm wondering if that motivates some of the liberal Democrats to say, "Oh no, we can't be supporting what he's doing." You know what I mean? But I don't know. They're so slavish in in a lot of ways to these Republicans. I just don't. I'm just wondering. In that case, it seemed like I can see how some Democrats would have said, no, this is too much. We can't be on the same side as this guy, but I'd like to hear your comment.
Yeah, I think it goes back to something we were talking about before, which is when Netanyahu and Trump were in power at the same time, there was a lot of talk about Netanyahu's Israel as opposed to, just the idea of Israel doing something, a continuation, not specific to Netanyahu. There was a way to kind of link the right wing here with the right wing there. And I think, that has kind of shifted. As we've said, you see more criticism that goes beyond Netanyahu. But I think our position is probably that Netanyahu has been a great boon to the anti-Zionist movement, right? I mean, because we're seeing right now this right-wing government, this is the true face of Israel. What they're saying, they're straight up about what they want to do, about what they're going to do. Netanyahu was on Face the Nation about a month ago, and they asked him about the declining support of Israel, and he said, I don't think he was trying to be glib. He basically said, the reason why Israel's opinions of Israel are going down, or it's having this issue with Democratic voters, is because we need to protect our security. People don't understand our security issues. And as a result of that, we have a lot of collateral damage, which means a lot of Palestinians die. People see the dead Palestinians and they turn on Israel. Well, that's true. Yes, of course they do. So, I mean, at its essence, I think that's what we're talking about. So I do think it is easier for Democrats to criticize the government in Israel when it's right wing. I would say, why do people do the things they do? I mean, in the case of Rashida Tlaib, she was smeared by multiple members of her own party and called anti-Semitic on the House floor, which to my mind is just, we're setting up a situation where people know this is what's going to happen. The same reason that AIPAC pours, $7-8 million into like a rinky-dink race is to say, if you step out of line on this issue, we'll come into your district and spend this money. It's a threat. It's a way to get people to not bring up this issue, or people within the context of their constituents to say, you should tell the Barney Frank story that you told.
We were talking earlier about the fact that Barney Frank once said that he would come out against the settlements, which were destroying the two-state solution. This was many years ago. He told an activist in Palestine or Israel, I would come out against settlements if you could show me 5,000 Jews in my district who would support me on that question. So he had a point. Good point.
Yeah, my point being that politicians obviously need to see that level of base and support to think that it has any chance to go up against the other side, which is so much money and has so many resources. And I think Tlaib's a great example of somebody who, if you've seen the way she's like vilified publicly, her and Ilhan Omar, I don't think anybody would necessarily was on the fence on the issue would be rushing to defend Palestinian rights or be criticizing Israel when they can see what can happen, especially if they're potentially running a race where it's going to be close. And that a lot of these people we're talking about run in districts where they win with overwhelming margins that gives them some separation when it comes to this issue. And not everybody is in that situation, so it's a challenge.
I'm sorry, could you make that? I didn't get your last point.
No, just that some members of the squad, they're obviously in a position where
they're strong.
Yeah, strong.
Yes.
Locally.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you mentioned the true face of Israel. And it took me back about 2 weeks when I heard Gideon Levy interviewed, and he says, I hope Israel hurries up and annexes the West Bank so that there's no doubt about the true face of apartheid Israel. It was a shocking thing to hear, but he has a point.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's been true since this government took over, and the things that they say and do publicly, and to what we're speaking about, just know. But going back to the question about what the U.S. can do, there have been examples in the past, certainly, when it comes to like George Bush with the loans, for instance, an example of somebody potentially standing up to Israel. But
1991.
Yes, and he paid the price politically, obviously, when he ran for re-election. Clinton ran against him from the right. So, I think it's happened, but we do not see it with Biden. I think, I cover the State Department briefings every time they happen. It's just, say the word accountability like 6,000 times, but there's actually no accountability. That's the thing. With Shireen Abu Akleh, we've talked about it, consistently. Ned Price, all these, State Department spokespeople will get up there and say, like, we just want accountability and transparency and all this stuff. Nothing. So, I mean, the question, can the U.S. do something? Yeah, of course they can, but we've seen nothing from this administration in way of that.
I have another question. Let's go back to Saigon. The moment that happens, and I can imagine it would, do you think that then they're going to tear down the walls, give the Palestinians homes back to them, give them their keys back, tell the settlers to stop it, clamp down on the IDF? What practically would change?
Well, that's a great point. You're saying that there would not be Palestinian, if we cut off aid, it's not like Palestinians would be liberated. Right. Dorothy, you're talking about, we can all speculate about what the future holds, and I'm not good at that crystal ball stuff, but the one thing I'd say is that, apropos of what Michael said a minute ago, that this Israeli government has been great for activists in this country because it's the true face of Israel. I think that they are going to get wise and start having a liberal Zionist, sort of gentler, hey, yeah, we've been too hard on the Palestinians, we got to give them something, that's the first thing that would change. They would start electing liberal Zionists, and that would make our job a lot harder to try to put, lipstick on it, but that's my sense of it. Mark.
If we ended the funding to the Israeli government, at least we would no longer be complicit.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That's all it means to me.
Yes.
Say it louder, Mark.
At least we wouldn't be complicit.
Right.
Minimally. That's what we would accomplish.
Yes, that's very important, yeah.
Yes.
I'll try to be quick. Because I'm with UUs for Justice in the Middle East, and that's kind of a so-called faith-based group, I just want to say that I'm sure all so-called Christian Zionists are evangelicals. It really isn't true that all evangelicals are like that. And the best example I know of is the executive director of Churches for Middle East Peace, May Cannon. She will tell everybody she's evangelical, but not that kind. So there's some hope there. Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. I know that, that's a great point because, so often we hear, I've heard in my community, don't call all Jews this, don't generalize. They're not all, now you're being anti-Semitic when you make, but we commonly throw around generalizations about evangelicals all the time, and I don't know that community well, so thank you for that. I appreciate it.
My uncle, rest in peace, John Stam, was, like my parents, evangelical missionary in Costa Rica. He was a radical Marxist evangelical. That sounds like a few oxymorons thrown in there, but my uncle, case in point.
Wow.
My parents, also missionaries, not so much, more kind of conservative, but if you want to find out more, read some of his books. His name is Juan Estam, S-T-A-M.
Thank you.
He was a theologian, traveled throughout Latin America and Cuba, and taught it and preached. Yeah. Are we coming to a beautiful ending to this remarkable conversation with Phil? Oh, yes, hi.
Hi, my name's Phil. And I got in a little bit late, so I don't know if my question is something you've already covered, but I hear your optimism about young people having different opinions about what's going on in the Middle East. It must be, what seems clear to me, that they're not using mainstream media as their sources, because you'll get nothing correct there. They don't challenge anybody on this at all. So, but I'm not optimistic because Congress seems like more than ever not to really care what the average public wants. You mentioned the numbers in that survey. None of them act in that regard at all. They all seem to be afraid. Same with the war. I think the numbers are about 50% of the population's against this war and want peace. You don't hear one person. I can't think of one person in Congress trying to find a resolution. So I don't mean to be cynical, but I kind of feel the same way, that where do you go from here? It's great that the young people have those feelings and are leaning in the right direction, but how do you keep momentum going?
You can take that. That's a big question. How do you
That's
keep
a big
momentum
question.
going?
Come on, Michael. You've thought about that one.
How do you keep momentum going? Well, I think, something that I would say is, this fight, we've talked about our complicity in it and potentially ending, funding these atrocities. Another thing is just how this issue impacts people locally and how they can potentially, fight for it. And I think the people in this room, do it consistently. I'm talking to a group that obviously does it in their communities, but I'm not even sure if the American people know the extent of some of these, when we talk about BDS, like the First Amendment implications here and like what's going on in their communities. And there is certainly a growing awareness. And I think as people, it sounds like a cliche, but like in many situations, as they act locally, it becomes a situation where they're potentially also acting globally. And, a few weeks ago, at the website, I spoke to this guy, Steve Feldman, who's a dermatologist in North Carolina. This guy gave a speech at the University of Arkansas over Zoom. They were supposed to pay him for it, and they didn't pay him because when he was sent the email to accept his payment, he had to check off a box that says, "I promise not to boycott Israel," and he refused to do it. And they will not pay him. They're holding out $500, the state of Arkansas, because this guy won't agree to refuse to boycott Israel. This is he's a JPP member, actually. He's Jewish. He has family in Israel. He's been in Palestine many times. And I asked him what he thought about the situation, and he said he thought it was great. He didn't care about the $500. He just thought it was fantastic that people were going to cover the story and more people were going to figure out what BDS was. That was his essential message to me. More people find out about this and more people find out how Palestinians are treated. It's eventually going to tip, slowly but surely. So that's what I'd say. I just, like, within the context of people acting locally, sometimes this issue is so huge and it's so far away that I think people are, it's just the stereotypical thing that cannot be solved. And I think it's overwhelming. What's that? Oh, they ultimately paid him?
They treated it as an honorarium.
Oh, that's great.
They named it a stipend.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Just give it a different name.
So we got it.
He wasn't a vendor, it was an honorarium, so it didn't show up on the rolls of vendors for the state.
And JPP
There
got
was
the money, so it's happy.
There's a similar thing with Abby Martin in Georgia. I think she was going to give a talk, and there was a lawsuit.
Yeah, she was also, Abby Martin, the
remember.
same thing. She was going to give a talk, I think, University of Georgia or somewhere like that. She was supposed to give a talk on media literacy. And they said in order to speak, you have to sign and get paid. You have to sign something that says you agree to the Georgia's anti-BDS law, which you have to essentially sign an oath to Israel.
It's just outrageous. And this is the academic world. It might as well be you got a sign that you're not a communist. It's straight out of the 50s HUAC. I had 3 minutes of fame speaking against anti-BDS at a hearing at the State House, and I was able to evoke the memory of Donald Lothrop, after who this auditorium is named, who in the 1950s our church was infiltrated by the FBI and then blacklisted as a communist front, and many members were brought before a committee. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the party? And Lothrop would not testify, but got some of his contacts in the State House to come up with a joint meeting of the legislature, and he made an address to them, basically a "Have you no shame?" I entertain communists, I entertain Republicans, I entertain, just like Jesus, the taxpayers and the publicans and the sinners and the prostitutes. And it was just this fiery speech. We have copies of it. And 3 weeks later, the committee was disbanded. It was a marvelous moment in this church's history. Others. Susan.
I just wanted to, I don't have a question. I kind of just have an observation along the lines of popular opinion and the word spreading. We do a lot of, I do a lot of, and many of the other people here do a lot of standouts, leafleting, boycotting, and the difference in people's attitudes between, say, 10 years ago and today is amazing.
Wow.
So many people say thank you for doing
Wow.
this. Compared to the people that used to practically spit in your face, there are
Thank
very
you.
few of those, and many, many who listen, who appreciate. Thank you. So I feel optimistic in that if it's the grassroots movement that I think will have a big influence on where we go from here.
And I got to tell you that I live on a street in Brookline that is several Israeli families and a very, very Jewish street. And I finally felt strong enough to put a End the Occupation, Free Palestine bumper sticker on my car. And if you want one, there's some on the back. There's some on the back that you can take for free, and you can also graze some of the beautiful Palestinian products that we have from the Olive Branch Fair Trade. And are we coming to a close here somehow? We just really want to thank both of you, for being here. The question was, what happened to your car? No slashed tires yet. Steve wants to make an announcement.
I just want to say that the Mondoweiss tour of the Boston area continues on Saturday afternoon in suburban Lincoln when Phil, and I guess Mark told you you're not going to make it, but when Phil comes and talks to us at 1:30 on Saturday the 10th, and the topic will be kind of a continuation of this conversation because he's going to answer the question, what can progressives do to change Middle East policy, America's Middle East policy? And that's going to be at on June 10th at 1:30, and the address is 15 Bedford Road. It's Bemis Hall in Lincoln, and of course there's no charge to come. So I hope either people, and there's free parking too, you don't have to worry about.
Across the street at the Stone Church.
Right. So people who are online who want to hear the answer to that question, or people who are here, I hope you'll come and join us, and thank you.
The what? Mugs. We have mugs for everybody who is here physically today. We'll have some more mugs if you want to come into the church and get a Mondoweiss mug to drink your morning coffee. We can also sell you a pound of the best coffee on the planet. I import it myself from El Salvador and shamelessly market it, mostly at farmers markets, but here at the church as well. We have, don't forget, a petition to free the Holy Land Foundation and our email list. We'd love to keep in touch with you and let you know what's going on. We got a few books by Miko Peled and Barry Lynn, and lots of books by 1,000 different authors. Browse away, or come back on a Wednesday. We have open house every Wednesday at noon. And a quick rundown on what's coming down. Tomorrow, Friday, Dylan Buston, the songwriter, playwright, storyteller. Saturday, Peña Latinoamericana in Chelsea. Sunday, Matt Callahan concert of songs of slavery and abolition. And freedom, followed by our annual meeting for members. And then a week later, we have Dr. Robert Bellinger speaking again on the subject of Juneteenth and slavery and emancipation. And on the 19th, we have the reception for the Golden Rule. And we'll hear from their crew, as well as from some representatives from MAPA and from Physicians for Human Rights. It should be a wonderful night, and go down and check out the sailboat as well. A wonderful story about the refurbishing of a 1950s magnificent sailboat. I probably have forgotten 2 or 3 things, but it doesn't matter because we're just really happy about having Phil and Michael join us tonight. And we bid you a good night. Thank you, all of you who joined us on Zoom and YouTube. And thank you to Luis Guzman, who made us a beautiful dinner beforehand for our reception. And we'll make us another dinner on 19th for the reception for the Golden